The morning her SUV stopped across the mouth of my runway, Dana Whitlock rolled down her window and told me a man ought to know when it was time to step aside for progress. Behind her, roof lines had already climbed toward both ends of the strip my family had flown from for 30 years. She said the board had decided my runway no longer fit the character of the community. I didn't argue with her. I just watched the sedan with the federal plate turn in through my gate, and I watched the smile slide off her face like water off a wing. If you enjoy stories where a homeowners association thinks it holds the power and gets undone by its own paperwork, subscribe and stay to the end. My name is Darius Hale. I'm 52 years old and I own 73 acres of red dirt and bay grass with a 3,100 feet strip of asphalt running north to south down the middle of it. People call it Hailfield, and the name was on a county plat before I ever learned to drive. My father bought the land in the late 1960s, back when this whole stretch of the county was cattle, hay, and one gas station that closed at dusk. He cut the first runway himself with a borrowed grader and a level he set on the hood of his truck, and he flew a tired old high-wing airplane out of here for 20 years before he handed me the keys and the deed and the folder of documents that mattered more than either. I spent 26 years as an aircraft maintenance technician, most of it on turbine equipment. The last stretch running my own small repair shop about 9 miles from my front gate. That work taught me two things that ended up saving me. The first was that airplanes don't care how confident you are. They care whether the numbers are right. The second was that every serious thing in aviation exists twice. Once in the world and once on paper. And the paper version is the one that survives an argument. So when I took over this property, I didn't just mow it and fly it. I paved it properly. I lit the ends. I registered it. And I made sure every agency that could ever have an opinion about it had a file with my name in it. Hailfield is a private-use airfield, which is a specific thing and not a vague one. It isn't a commercial airport. There's no control tower, no terminal, no scheduled traffic, and nobody lands here without my permission. What it is legally is a registered landing facility that appears in aeronautical records, that has published coordinates, an assigned identifier, and a documented runway orientation. I use it for my own airplane, for post-maintenance test flights on equipment out of my shop, and for the occasional trip when a customer 3 states away needs a part and a set of hands the same day. In a normal year, I might make 400 takeoffs and landings off that strip, which is quiet by airport standards and constant by neighborhood standards. The part almost nobody bothered to learn is what happened in 1988 when my father worked with the county on the parcels surrounding us. Because the strip was already here and already active, the county recorded a navigation easement across the adjoining land, and it also recorded height and used restrictions tied to the approach and departure paths on both ends. A navigation easement is a plain, boring instrument. It says the owner of that neighboring land accepts that aircraft will pass over it at low altitude, gives up the right to complain about the noise and the shadow, and agrees not to build anything that intrudes into the airspace an airplane needs. It runs with the land, not with the person, which means it binds whoever buys that dirt next forever, whether they read it or not. For about 11 years after Silver Pines went in, none of this mattered to anybody. The first phase of the subdivision was 40-ohm houses set well back from my property line, and most of the people who bought them thought the airplane was interesting. Kids waved from their yards. A retired mail carrier named Ellis used to bring his grandson to the fence on Saturday mornings to watch me run the engine up. I flew neighborly, kept my patterns tight, avoided early departures on weekends, and in 11 years, I got exactly 2 complaints, both from the same man, both about a Saturday afternoon flight, both resolved with a handshake and a jar of honey from my own hives. That was the whole history of conflict at Hailfield until the year Dana Whitlock was elected president of the Silver Pines Homeowners Association. I met her in April on a Tuesday in my own hangar. She came in without knocking, wearing a cream jacket that cost more than my mower, holding a clipboard she never once wrote on. She looked past me at the airplane, at the oil-stained concrete, at the shelf of hand tools my father had labeled in grease pencil, and she smiled the way people smile at a museum exhibit they find slightly sad. She said she'd expected the owner of a place like this to be somebody different, and she let the sentence sit there unfinished so I could fill in the ending myself. I didn't fill it in. I told her my name, offered her coffee, and watched her decide she was already finished with me. She wanted to talk about noise, she said, though she hadn't come with a single complaint in hand. She wanted to talk about property values and about the direction the community was heading and about how her board had a mandate to protect the investment of every family behind that gate. She used the word community 11 times in 9 minutes. When I told her the airfield was registered, active, and older than the subdivision, she nodded the way you nod at a child explaining a rule to a game they invented. Then she said something I wrote down that night because I knew I'd want it later. That men my age often confused owning land with having a say in what a community becomes. 4 months later, I was out at the south end doing a walk of the runway surface, checking for frost heave and loose seal when I noticed something in the grass beyond my fence line. Survey stakes. A neat row of them, orange flagging tied to each one, marching straight through the field on the far side of my approach end. Somebody had been standing in that pasture with a total station, shooting angles, laying out lots. I stood there with a can of crack sealer in my hand and did the math on where the center line of my runway pointed. And I understood that whoever set those stakes had put a building envelope directly under the place my landing gear crossed at 40 feet. The notice came the following week. A glossy trifold in every mailbox in the area, including mine, announcing the Silver Pines' expansion. 62 new homes in 2 phases, a new entry monument, a landscaped boulevard, an amenity green. Dana's photograph was on the back, arms folded, standing in front of the gate with the confidence of someone opening a stadium. Inside was a color site plan, and on that site plan, my 73 acres appeared as a soft green rectangle with a single label across it. Open agricultural tract. There was no runway drawn on it. There was no strip of asphalt, no hangar, no approach corridor, no easement hatching, nothing at all to suggest that a registered landing facility sat where the map showed hay. I brought that trifold to the community information meeting they held in the clubhouse. And I waited through 40 minutes of talk about paint palettes and mailbox standards before I raised my hand. I asked plainly what had happened to the runway on the plan. Dana looked at me across a room of folding chairs and said that nobody builds an entire community around one man's hobby. I said it wasn't a hobby. It was a registered airfield with an identifier. And I offered her the file number out loud twice slowly so the people writing things down could get it. She said the expansion had been engineered by professionals and reviewed by the county. And then she moved to the next question before I finished my sentence. She found me in the parking lot afterward. That's where she said the honest part, the part she wouldn't say into a microphone. She told me Silver Pines' values would jump the day that ugly patch of asphalt finally got developed like everything else out here, that the market had already priced in my leaving, and that everyone would be better off once I stopped pretending. The 1970s were coming back. Then she asked what number would make me go away. I told her the land wasn't for sale and she laughed and said everything is for sale. Some people just need help understanding their own timeline. What came next arrived in envelopes. The first was a noise complaint forwarded from the association describing my aircraft as a persistent disturbance. Then a request that I voluntarily limit flight operations to between 10 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon, weekdays only. Then a letter asserting that my operations were adversely affecting property values within the association and inviting me to a hearing before the architectural committee. Then a demand that I bring my hangar into compliance with Silver Pines' exterior standards, including approved siding colors because a metal building was inconsistent with the visual character of the neighborhood. Then in November, an actual invoice, a $200 fine for an unapproved structure, mailed to a man whose land had never been part of their association for one single day. I paid nothing and I answered everything. Every letter got a written reply dated with the file number, the plat reference, the recorded easement and a single sentence stating that my property was not subject to the association. I sent them by certified mail. I kept the green cards in a binder with tabs. I photographed the survey stakes on the 11th of each month from the same 3 positions so the progression would be undeniable. And every time Dana spoke to me in front of her board members like I was a groundskeeper she'd hired and was disappointed in, I went home and wrote down the date, the words, and who else was standing there. In March, the excavators arrived. They came in on low boys before 6 o'clock in the morning, 4 of them, and by noon, they had ripped a haul road through the pasture at my south end. Within 9 days, there were water lines in the ground. Within 3 weeks, the first foundations went in, and I stood at my fence with a hand level and a tape, and understood that the closest slab was less than 300 feet from the end of my pavement, sitting almost exactly under the center line extended. Then the framers came and the walls went up, and they weren't the single-story ranch houses of the original phase. They were 2 stories worthy homes with steep roofs and stone chimneys, and every one of them climbed straight into the air I needed. The construction didn't stop at houses either, and honestly, the houses weren't even the worst of it. Dana had put a decorative boulevard down the new spine road with 28 feet ornamental light standards. She'd specified a masonry perimeter wall along the north edge of the expansion, which sat on the very ground the easement was supposed to keep clear. And she had planted trees, dozens of them, live oaks and cypress in a double row, The kind that reach 50 feet and don't ask permission. Somebody looking at a rendering would call it beautiful. I looked at it and saw a wall of obstructions rising into a departure path, growing taller every year on land that had been legally restricted from exactly that since before she owned a driver's license. I wrote the county. I did it properly with a cover letter.